The corridors of Westbridge Private Hospital stretched long and pale beneath the fluorescent lights. The hum of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum filled the otherwise hushed air. For most nurses, walking past room 312 was a relief. It meant they had been spared the dreaded duty of caring for the hospital's most infamous patient. But this evening, the assignment sheet had Emily Carter's name written neatly beside that room number. Emily was only 22, younger than most of her colleagues, but the weight she carried often made her feel decades older. Her mother's debts, left behind after an illness that insurance barely touched, pressed on her shoulders like an invisible yoke. Each shift was another step toward paying them off, another night of sore feet and burning eyes, another reminder that her path in life had been carved not by choice, but by necessity. Windshield, when she received the assignment, whispers traveled quickly among the staff.
"Knee room 312? Poor girl, she must have angered someone," one nurse murmured at the station. "Better her than me," another added, shaking her head. "That man's a lost cause." Emily heard them, though she kept her expression neutral. She had grown used to dismissive voices, whether they were from debt collectors at her door or colleagues mocking her plain shoes. But inside, something bristled. A patient was a patient, and to her, no one was a lost cause. Dr. Gregory Harris, head of neurology, stood waiting by the door to 312. His gray-streaked hair caught the light, and his eyes were stern but not unkind. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying the authority of years spent commanding a ward. "This case isn't easy. Richard Hale has been in a coma for months. His family visits rarely, and most of the staff, well, they treat him as if he were furniture. I need someone with patience, someone who won't walk away." Emily clutched the chart tighter against her chest.
The name Richard Hale was printed in bold. Even she, with her long hours and little time for gossip, knew who he was. A millionaire businessman, once the subject of headlines, now reduced to a body sustained by machines. She nodded. "I'll do my best, doctor." "Your best," Dr. Harris replied evenly, "will make all the difference." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the polished door. "Go on." Her hand hesitated for a moment on the handle. The metal felt colder than the hallway air. She drew in a breath, steadying herself, then pushed the door open. Room 312 was unlike the others. It was larger, lined with soft lighting and expensive oak furniture. The curtains were drawn back to reveal the last amber rays of a setting sun spilling across the city skyline. In the center of the room, beneath the quiet chorus of monitors, lay Richard Hale. Emily's steps slowed as she approached the bed. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and fortune looked impossibly still. His jawline was sharp, his lashes dark against pale skin, his body broad but unmoving beneath the hospital gown. Tubes and wires crisscrossed around him, keeping him tethered to the world. If not for the rise and fall of his chest, he might have seemed carved from marble. She had been warned not to expect anything. No reaction, no sign of awareness. Still, the sight unsettled her. Emily set down the fresh linen she carried, adjusted the IV pole, and tried to focus on the routine tasks drilled into her training. Yet as she tucked the corners of the sheet with steady hands, she found herself speaking before she realized it. "Hang in there, Mr. Hale," she murmured, her voice soft as if afraid to disturb the still air. "Not everyone is heartless, I promise." Third surprised her. She wasn't in the habit of talking to patients who could not answer, but as the syllables floated into the quiet, something inside her loosened. Perhaps she had needed to hear them as much as he did. For a moment, the only reply was the steady beep of the heart monitor. Green light rose and fell in rhythm, indifferent, yet strangely reassuring. Emily glanced at the screen, then back at Richard's face. She couldn't explain it, but as she stood there, she felt an odd flicker of connection, as if her words might have traveled farther than sound alone. The feeling passed quickly, leaving her with nothing but the sterile room and her own weary reflection in the glass. She shook her head, chastising herself for indulging in foolish thoughts. With one last look at her silent patient, Emily gathered her things and prepared to step out. Behind her, the monitor continued its steady pulse, casting a faint glow against the dim walls. And though she told herself not to believe in miracles, she walked away carrying a sliver of faith she hadn't felt in years. Faith that, somehow, kindness, whispered into silence, might matter.
Need these in Westbridge Private Hospital carried a stillness that could press down on even the strongest nurses. By the time most patients were asleep and the families had gone home, the halls seemed to hum with the electric silence of fluorescent lights. For Emily Carter, nights often meant exhaustion, the ache in her feet, and the long, quiet stretches where no one seemed to notice her work. Yet since being assigned to room 312, her routine had taken on something different, something almost ritualistic. She found herself speaking aloud when she entered Richard Hale's room, even though she had no reason to. At first it was only practical words, "I'm just adjusting your blanket," or "I'll check your IV now." But over the following nights, her words softened, stretched into fragments of her own life, tiny confidences whispered into the hush of monitors and the faint hum of machines. She thought often of her mother in those hours. Her mother's last words before illness carried her away had been simple. "No matter how harsh the world becomes, promise me you'll stay kind." Emily carried that promise like a fragile ember cupped in her palms. So even here, even to a man who could not speak, she tried to be kind. "Tonight's cafeteria special was meatloaf," she murmured one evening, folding a fresh sheet with quick, practiced hands. "I wouldn't recommend it, even for a millionaire. I picked up a sandwich from the corner deli instead. Cheap, but at least it tasted real." She smiled faintly at her own words, shaking her head as though amused by herself. She dipped the cloth into warm water, wrung it out carefully, and wiped along his arm with gentle precision. "I know you can't answer me," she said, "but it makes the night go faster. Maybe it even makes me feel less alone." While unbeknownst to her, in the deep cavern of unconsciousness where Richard's mind drifted, her voice cut through like a thread of light. It was faint at first, the way sound seeps into a dream, indistinct and far away, but the tone, steady, warm, unhurried, pulled at something in him. He couldn't move, couldn't open his eyes, but each syllable left a ripple in the darkness, reminding him that he had not been entirely abandoned. On another shift, as she tucked the sheet around his shoulders, a fellow nurse stepped in with a chart. The woman arched an eyebrow, listening to Emily's quiet murmur. "Talking to him again? You know he can't hear you, right?" Emily flushed, caught off guard, but she didn't stop smoothing the sheet. "Maybe he can," she said softly. Her colleague snorted. "Suit yourself, I'd save my breath." With a shrug, she left the room, heels tapping against the hall floor, until the sound faded. Emily sat down by the bed, resting for a moment. The glow of the monitor painted soft green lines across her face. "People think I'm foolish," she whispered. "But I'd rather be foolish and try than walk away like he doesn't matter." She looked at Richard's still features. "You matter." Inside his silence of water in a desert, he felt them even if he couldn't answer, and the darkness seemed less endless. Emily leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "If you can hear me," she murmured, her voice no more than a breath, "hold on a little longer. The world isn't as heartless as it seems. I'll prove it to you." The room settled again into its rhythm. The hum of the IV pump, the faint whoosh of air from the vent, the beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. Emily glanced at the steady line glowing on the screen. It was the same as always, yet in that moment it seemed to answer her, steady and rhythmic, as if in quiet agreement. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that speaking into the silence wasn't wasted, that maybe, somehow, she was being heard. Nirain stitched thin silver lines down the window of room 312. Somewhere along the corridor, a floor machine murmured, then faded, leaving only the soft chorus of monitors and the whisper of air through the vents. It was the kind of weekend night when time moved like slow syrup, when a nurse could hear her own breathing and the tick of her watch. Emily washed her hands, warmed a basin, and pulled on fresh gloves. She had learned to begin with small, steady motions,
corner of the sheet, angle of the pillow, the careful turn of a wrist so fluids ran cleanly. "I'm going to freshen your hands," she said, more to keep herself anchored than to inform the man who did not answer. "The rain makes everything feel colder." She folded the cloth and traced a line across Richard Hale's knuckles. The skin was cool, the tendons defined even in stillness. She lifted each finger, drawing between them the way she had been taught, respectful, unhurried. When she reached the base of his thumb, something touched back, a pressure so faint she almost missed it, like the brush of a moth's wing. Her own breath paused. She set the cloth on the tray, narrowed her eyes, and waited. Nothing. The room held itself perfectly still, as if the building had decided to listen too. "Okay," she whispered, half to him, half to the quiet. "Maybe I imagined that." She resumed, smoothing across his palm in a slow arc. This time the movement was clearer, a small flex, the barest curl of his index finger against her glove. Emily's heart jumped hard enough to sting. "Mr. Hale?" She glanced at the monitor. The rhythm stayed steady, indifferent. She placed her fingertips lightly on his, not gripping, only offering contact. "If you can hear me, it's all right." She pressed the call button and stepped into the hall. Dr. Harris was on the floor that night, his coat open, a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He came at once, eyebrows climbing at her tone. Inside the room, he set the cup aside and examined the patient with practiced economy. "Describe what you felt," he said. "A slight curl of the finger," Emily answered, forcing her voice to be even. "Twice. It felt deliberate." He nodded, checked reflexes along the nail beds, pinched a shoulder muscle gently, watched for any flinch. "Spinal pathways can trigger reflex contractions," he said, not unkindly. "It happens. Don't get your hopes up on the first twitch." The words settled between them like a folded blanket, meant to comfort, heavy all the same. Emily studied Richard's hand on the sheet, broad, elegant, still. "I understand," she said. She did. She also felt a quiet, stubborn certainty beginning to stand up inside her, as if someone had pulled back a chair and invited it to sit. Dr. Harris adjusted the drip, scrolled through the latest notes, and signed the chart. "Keep observing. Document everything. If it repeats, call me." And he offered her a brief look, the kind that said he valued patience more than enthusiasm. Then he left, the door easing shut behind him. Rain thickened, drumming softly on the glass. Emily resumed her tasks, this time narrating each one for the record and for herself. Repositioning left arm. Checking line. Warming hands again. She took his hand between both of hers, lending him her heat. Inside whatever darkness held him, the sound of her voice traveled farther than usual. It threaded through the fog, found a place that remembered the comfort of warm skin, the shape of a hand closing around another. A signal, weak, wavering, moved down from mind to muscle and asked for one small answer. His fingers gathered and released, like the first shy attempt of a child to grasp. Emily felt it. Not a mistake, not a brush of cloth. A real living squeeze, brief, unsteady, but unmistakable. Looked up so quickly her ponytail brushed her collar. The monitor remained calm, its green lines stepping along. "Richard," she said, and the name surprised her with how natural it sounded in her mouth. "I felt that." She waited, counting her own breaths. 1, 2, 3. The rain kept time. "If you can hear me," she tried again, keeping her tone low and steady, "you're safe. You don't have to be afraid." Cumbersome came. Doubt tried to return, carrying Dr. Harris's caution in its pocket. But something about the earlier squeeze had a weight to it, like a coin in the palm, small but undeniable. She documented the event in the chart. Slight, voluntary flexion observed, repeated once, patient, otherwise stable. The words looked flat on the page, unable to carry the tremor in her chest. She returned to the bedside and took his wrist, not to test him, but to be near. "I know you've been alone in there a long time," she said. "People think silence means absence. I don't. I think silence is a place to cross."
It's ordinary music. The ventilator's sigh, the IV's quiet clicks, the metronome pulse of the heart monitor. Emily let her shoulders lower. She set the cloth back in the warm water, wrung it, and drew it over the back of his hand one more time. The second squeeze came as the cloth left his skin, firmer than before, a small insistence. His fingers closed around the curve of her wrist with fragile determination, then loosened, spent by the effort. Tears sprang up, fast and hot, blurring the green graph into a river. "You did that," she said, laughing under her breath because joy, when it arrives in a hospital room at night, is always a little disbelieving. "You really did." Pedestrians considered calling Dr. Harris again, but the impulse passed. The first report could be written, the next step could wait a few minutes. This, right now, felt like something meant to be kept between the three of them, the man, the nurse, and the rain. Emily leaned closer, close enough to see the gentle quiver in his eyelids, close enough to feel the warmth rising back into his fingers. She placed her free hand lightly over his, anchoring him to the world he couldn't yet enter, and let her voice fill the room in a steady thread. "You will wake up," she whispered. "I believe you will." Outside, the storm began to thin. The monitor kept its even cadence, unwavering, as if it had chosen a side. Morning poured through the tall window of room 312, rinsing the walls in pale gold. The night's rain had moved on, leaving the city bright and newly washed. Emily adjusted the blinds so the light fell soft across the bed, then checked the lines and the chart, as she always did at the start of a shift. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said, setting a fresh cup of water on the tray, even though he could not drink on his own yet. Habit mattered. Care was built from small, faithful things. Knee reached for the call bell to ring respiratory for a routine check. "Mr. Hale," she called, just to announce she was about to shift his position. The moment her voice crossed the room, his eyelids stirred. First a tremor, then a slow, fragile lift, like a curtain unsure of its cue. Emily froze, her hands suspended above the sheets. The blue beneath those lids was clouded and raw with effort, but it was unmistakably awake. "Mr. Hale?" she whispered again, and the syllables seemed to give him a place to land. His throat worked. Sound scraped through, hoarse with long silence. "Where's the nurse who talked to me?" Restraint tightened around the rail. For a heartbeat, she didn't move at all. He had not asked about doctors or machines or family. He had asked for the voice. She hit the wall button, her own voice steadier than she felt. "Dr. Harris to room 312, patient responsive." The hall. In seconds, the room filled. A respiratory therapist rolling in equipment. A tech with a pulse oximeter. A charge nurse ready with a blood pressure cuff. Dr. Harris entered last, coat already off, eyes sharp and bright. "Mr. Hale," he said, taking the bedside, "I'm Dr. Harris. You're in Westbridge Private Hospital. You've been resting a long time." His hands moved with clean economy. Pupils, light response, grip test. Richard blinked against the brightness, then swallowed. "Where's the nurse who talked to me?" he repeated, as if the question had been waiting in his chest for months. Emily stepped back, heat rising in her face. It felt strange to stand in a crowd and wonder if she was the one being called and yet be afraid to claim it. She raised a tentative hand, then let it fall. Around her, voices overlapped in gentle instructions. Numbers, measurements, the business of proof that life was returning. Dr. Harris glanced over his shoulder. "Emily has been on this case," he said. "She's here now." Richard's gaze, still unfocused, drifted until it found the spot where her shadow touched the floor. It climbed, searching for a shape his mind already knew by sound.
When his eyes reached her face, they steadied. The machine seemed to hush for a second, or maybe it was only her breath stopping. "Hi," Emily said, uselessly, softly. "I'm here." The respiratory therapist adjusted the cannula and murmured something about oxygen flow. The charge nurse called out the blood pressure reading. Dr. Harris asked Richard to follow a light and to squeeze his fingers. He did, weakly, but on command. "Good," the doctor said. Satisfaction kept neat and professional. "Very good." Emily stood to the side, chart clutched like a shield. She watched the minute changes pass over Richard's face, the way confusion gave ground to recognition, the way exhaustion pulled at the edges and then released again. She had told herself not to hope too hard. She had told herself not to dream. But here, in daylight, hope was no longer reckless. It was simply accurate. The room buzzed to the news. Word traveled the ward as quickly as a summer rumor. Someone whispered in the doorway. Someone else slipped in, eyes wide, then slipped out again. Room 312? Awake? After all this time? The hospital had always said no one wanted 312, except Emily. Now, people wanted to be near it. "Let's give him a little quiet," Dr. Harris said at last, shepherding the extra bodies away with a calm hand. "Vitals stable. Neurology to reassess in a bit. Emily, stay." The door eased shut, and the hum of the unit faded to something gentler. They were three then, the doctor charting at the counter, the man relearning the weight of light and breath, and the nurse who had sewn nights together with a steady voice. Emily took the corner of the bed rail and met Richard's eyes as if they were meeting at the foot of a bridge they had both been walking toward, each from opposite banks. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you're safe." His lips shaped the thought before sound found it. He looked straight at her, as if the room had narrowed until it was only the two of them and the thin line of green moving across the screen. "I know." He paused, caught on a rough edge, then pressed on. "I know your voice." Dr. Harris's pen stopped mid-scratch. He watched without interrupting. "Can you tell us what you remember?" Richard's brow furrowed. He searched the dim corridor of his mind and came back with something small and sturdy. "Talking," he said, eyes still on Emily. "Night after night." Emily's throat tightened. She had never meant those whispers to be anything but kindness offered into silence, a way to keep the ember of her mother's instruction alive. Now the ember showed its light on both of them. Dr. Harris nodded, his tone gentle. "That's all right. We'll fill in the rest later. For now, breathe. Let your body do its work." Emily dampened a swab and touched it to Richard's lips. He accepted the coolness, and for a moment they were like two people on a porch at dawn, sharing the first quiet drink of the day, saying very little because very little needed saying. The window, the city's clatter began to rise. Delivery trucks, distant horns, the ordinary bravery of a new morning. Inside, the machines kept their careful beat. Emily adjusted the blanket, smoothed the edge against his shoulder, and, because habit mattered, spoke in the same calm cadence that had carried through so many nights. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Richard's lashes lowered, then lifted again as if he didn't want to lose sight of the face that matched the voice. He leaned a fraction toward the sound, to the person who had given him a line to hold when the dark felt endless. The effort cost him. Breath tore a little on the way out, then settled. He turned his head a few degrees and found her one more time. The words came rough but clear, shaped by gratitude older than this morning's light. "I heard you." Memory came to him like leaves blown against a fence, bits and pieces, never a whole shape. Some mornings he knew the city's name. By afternoon, it slipped away. He recognized the taste of coffee one day and, on the next, stared at the cup, as if it were a tool from a trade he had never learned. The only constant was work, the slow, patient work of learning to stand, to balance, to tell his hands and feet what to do. Weeks had passed since his eyes first opened. The room had changed from ICU quiet to the plain order of the rehabilitation floor. Parallel bars ran along one wall. A whiteboard listed simple goals: sit, stand, take 6 steps. Richard read the words and nodded, as if they belonged to another man and he was only borrowing them for a while. Emily adjusted the belt around his waist and stood a half step to the side, ready to lend support without stealing effort. "We'll try to the end of the bars," she said. "Small steps, no rush." He moved like someone crossing a stream on loose stones, careful, testing, surprised that each stone held. The bars were cool under his palms. Muscles remembered things his mind did not, and that was a mercy. Between attempts, Emily filled the minutes with simple stories. She talked about the man who whistled while he mopped the hallway, a tune from no one knew where. She described the food truck across the street that sold chicken soup that actually tasted like chicken. She told him how, after a long night, the first light in the windows across from the hospital made her feel as if the city were stretching and would soon be on its feet again. "Do I have an office?" Richard asked once, out of breath but curious. "You do," she said gently. "It can wait." He nodded, accepting the postponement not as a loss, but as a kindness. A few steps later, he stopped. "Do I have friends?" Emily held the gate belt and chose her words with care. "You have people who know your name," she said. "Right now, let's help your feet learn the floor." The chair by the window, Dr. Harris came in with his careful manner and his pen that clicked only once. He checked reflexes and balance, asked brief questions, and listened more than he spoke. "You're doing what matters," the doctor said. "Recovery isn't a staircase, it's a winding path. Some days you'll feel near the top. Some days you'll think the hill grew overnight. Keep walking." Considered this as if it were a business plan he could accept. "I don't remember the meeting," he said, meaning the meeting with his own life. "That's all right," Dr. Harris answered. "Memory will come in pieces. We'll lay them down side by side until they touch." When the doctor left, the room returned to its softer noises. Emily brought a cup with a sip of water and a towel folded square. She told him about a stray dog that trotted past the lobby every afternoon, about the volunteer who played the piano in the atrium on weekends, about a child who waved at everyone from the elevator as if he were the mayor. "These things," Richard said, looking toward the window though the blinds were half closed, "they feel steady." "Unleashed. That's the idea," she replied, and her smile was the kind that worked like a handrail. In the afternoon, sweat gathered at his temple. His breath shortened and then evened out. He placed one foot and then the other, a man measuring the world in small, honest distances. When his legs shook, Emily was there. When his grip faltered, her palm steadied the belt without urging too hard. Sometimes, a shard of memory surfaced. He saw a table with too many chairs and a view of water at evening. He heard a phone ring in another room. He remembered a voice saying his name, his own voice, firm and slightly impatient, and then the memory would tear, leaving only the clean edge where it broke. He frowned, trying to mend it, and failed. "Don't chase it," Emily said quietly. "Let it come when it's ready." And she set a cool cloth at the back of his neck. The simple relief of it made his eyes close. "You talk," he said, as if giving her an assignment. "A Beisho." "All right," she answered. She spoke of the radiator that clanked in the staff lounge and the nurse who baked pies in the shape of states, starting with Ohio, and promising to work west. She told him she had found a bright penny on the bus and kept it because it seemed rude to throw away a small piece of luck. And the dark rooms of his mind filled with modest, homey light. He felt the way a porch feels at dusk when a lamp clicks on and suddenly you can see the railing again. A therapist came and went. Later, Dr. Harris returned, reviewed the notes, and nodded at the numbers that marked progress. Seconds standing, steps taken, the arc of a hand reaching a little higher each day. Before he left, he rested a hand on Richard's shoulder. "Your mind is mending," he said. "Give it time. Give it peace." Richard looked at Emily then, not the chart. The words pressed against his throat from a place deeper than thought. He cleared it once and again. "I only remember your voice," he said. The sentence surprised even him. It landed in the space between them like a coin dropped into a well, ringing all the way down. Emily stilled. Color rose in her face, quick and human. Her hands found work at once, straightening the towel that did not need straightening, checking the belt that was already snug. "That's good," she said, eyes dropping to the floor, then to the window, then to the small crease in the sheet she smoothed twice. "Your body is doing a lot today. Let's not tire it out." He wanted to say more, to ask why that particular voice had traveled so far to find him, and why it felt like a lighthouse he recognized, though he could not name the shore. But she had turned a little away, drawing a polite curtain. Consciously, the blinds leaving the light kinder, she wrote a note on the board, "End of bars tomorrow," and capped the marker carefully. When he tried to hold her gaze again, she offered a quick, professional smile and busied herself with the tray. The monitor kept its patient rhythm. Outside, clouds thinned and a pale stripe of sky showed between them like a promise saved for later. Emily tucked the blanket along his knees, nodded once as if to mark the day, and stepped back one pace, close enough to help, far enough to keep the boundary she believed was right. Her heart had leapt. She would not let it run. Ni Wei watched her, the one constant in a world still rearranging itself, and closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to hold the sound of her voice where he could find it again. The records room lay at the end of a quiet corridor, a door most staff passed without seeing. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust, the kind that settles in corners and on the lips of old folders. A yellowed ceiling fixture cast a tired circle of light over the central table. Emily slipped in with a key from the nursing station, her badge swinging softly against her scrubs, and closed the door behind her. She told herself she had come to file routine notes. That was true, in part. But ever since Richard had opened his eyes, that other voice kept echoing. The one from a nurse weeks ago who'd smirked, "He's rich. His family will handle him. You're just a nurse." The remark had stuck like a burr. If family handled him, where had they been all those nights? She found the Hale folder by its weight alone, thick, clipped twice, edges softened by handling. Hale, Richard E. She opened it carefully, feeling the gravity of a life flattened into forms, admission dates, imaging reports, a log of vitals charted with tidy numbers. Then the sections people skim: contacts, authorizations, visitors. Emily read slowly. The first pages were clean and clinical. Farther in, the handwriting grew more human. Family updated. Left message? No answer. A notation repeated through the months like a broken refrain. Representative, Edward Hale, elder brother, signs approvals, declines bedside updates, requests financial summaries. Her eyes paused over declines bedside updates, as if the sentence had bruised the paper. She turned another page. A short email printed and stapled. Please correspond via counsel regarding insurance and property. Time is limited. No question about pain levels. No inquiry about comfort. No line that said, "How is he, really?" Emily laid her palm flat on the folder, as though steadying a table that had started to wobble. She had no right to judge a family from a distance, she knew that. People grieve oddly. Fear makes even good hearts clumsy. But the file didn't feel like grief. It felt like absence labeled business. She traced back along the timeline. In the earliest days, there were a few visitor signatures, then fewer, then none. The volunteer logs from the atrium piano showed more consistency than the Hale family sign-in. On one margin, a social worker had written, "Attempted family conference, postponed twice by E. Hale." The next line, "No new date offered." The room hummed with the old light. Outside, a cart rattled past, then quiet returned. Emily turned to the section for significant events. A thin sheet noted the morning when Richard had spoken. "Patient awake. Asks for the nurse who talked to me." The line lifted a corner of her mouth and hurt in a way that was both sweet and sad. She closed her eyes for a breath. She remembered the first night she had dared speak to him. The foolish feeling of telling a joke to air, promising kindness to a man who did not move. She remembered the warmth that came into his hand, the way it curled, unpracticed but certain, as if his body were answering a call laid down long before. Emily turned another page and found the consent forms. Edward Hale's signature ran at a confident slant, swift and elegant. Under relationship to patient, the box for sibling was sharply checked. Under emergency contact was a law firm address. There was no mention of Lily, the small, brave signature that would have been nothing but a looping child's hand. Of course there wouldn't be. Children don't sign forms. "Curiosity is tricky," Dr. Harris said from the doorway. Emily started, then exhaled. She hadn't heard the door open. He stepped in without reproach, his coat unbuttoned, a pen tucked lazily behind an ear. "I sometimes come here to remember that people are more than images and labs," he added, as if offering her shelter under his admission. "I was filing notes," Emily said quickly, then flushed because he would see through it. She lifted the folder a little. "I wondered about his family." "We all do," he replied. He came beside her, eyes following the lines she had just read. Families disappear for different reasons. Fear, exhaustion, shame. Sometimes it's as simple as not knowing what to say when a room is full of wires. She traced the line again with her eyes. "Declines bedside updates." "He is awake now," she murmured. "When the news spreads, will they be happy? Or will it only complicate their plans?" Setback Dr. Harris was quiet for a moment. "I can't answer that, Emily. But I can tell you what is ours to do. We care, whether anyone is watching or not." She nodded and closed Not to Wake a Sleeping House. The doctor tapped the file with 2 fingers, a gesture like a benediction, and left as lightly as he had come. Emily stayed a moment longer, palms flat against the table's cool edge. She thought of Richard at the parallel bars, of his breath snagging and then evening out, of the way hope had found a steady seat in him. She slid the folder back into place on the shelf, aligning the spine with the others until it looked just like any file. No heavier, no more important than the rest. In the hallway, the hospital resumed its ordinary speech. Pagers chirping, someone laughing near the elevators, a coffee lid snapping into place. She walked toward 312 with an odd steadiness in her steps, like a person who had made a quiet decision no one else could see. The decision wasn't grand. It was simply this: she would keep showing up, even if the signatures on the forms never did. Passing the nurse's station, she heard the tail end of a conversation. "Is he really awake?" the unit coordinator asked. "Word is yes," someone answered. "Neurology signed off on his progress this morning." "About time his family showed some face," another voice added, half joking, half bitter. Emily didn't pause. She rounded the corner toward the patient rooms, smoothing her badge with her thumb the way she did when she needed a thought to hold in her hand. "You matter," she had told him the night no one else was listening. She believed it as much now as then. At the bend before 312, the elevator doors slid open with a softened chime. A man stepped out in a dark coat, his movements efficient, his shoes soundless on the waxed floor. He didn't look around like visitors did. He moved as if he already knew the map and had come to claim his place on it. His gaze cut across the corridor and landed on the number above the door to 312. For a moment he stood very still, taking the room's measure from the threshold he hadn't crossed. Then his eyes lifted and met Emily's. They were cool eyes, trained to weigh and to decide. He dipped his chin in a greeting that was not a greeting, the way one acknowledges an obstacle rather than a person, and turned toward the nurse's station without a word, a file already in his hand. Emily watched him go, the tail of his coat falling neatly back into place, and felt something in the air shift, like the change in pressure before a storm that hasn't yet broken. She glanced at the closed door of room 312, then back at the figure bending toward the desk, introducing himself in a voice that carried authority and none of the warmth of home. She didn't need a name tag to know who he was. The evening shadows deepened in the VIP ward, stretching long fingers across the polished floor. The hospital had quieted to its nighttime rhythm, but room 312 was not at rest. Emily stood near the window, updating Richard's chart, when the door opened with a hushed groan. Edward Hale stepped inside, as if he owned the air he breathed. The cut of his suit was sharp, the tie knotted with precision. He carried no flowers, no warmth, only the cool gravity of a man who had come to settle business. Richard, propped against the raised bed, lifted his eyes slowly. His body was still relearning stamina, but his voice had gained strength over the weeks. "Edward," he said, the name tasting strange after so long. His brother gave a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Good to see you awake at last. We've all been waiting." Emily's hands stilled on the clipboard. She had heard about Edward, the elder brother who signed papers but rarely crossed the threshold. Now, standing in the room, he radiated the same absence dressed as presence. Edward pulled the visitor's chair close, but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it, casual yet imposing. "You've been through quite an ordeal. The doctors say recovery takes time. Best thing now is to rest." His tone lowered, smooth but edged. "Leave the company to someone who can keep it running. You don't need that weight anymore." Richard's jaw tightened. Fragments of memory wavered in his mind. Meetings, signatures, long nights at a desk. He couldn't recall details, but he knew instinctively the empire he had built was not Edward's to command. "The company," he said slowly, "isn't yours to decide about." Turbulent's smile sharpened. "You built something impressive, Richard. I'll grant you that. But the world doesn't pause for sentiment. Markets move. Partners need certainty. Do you think investors will wait while you relearn how to walk?" Emily felt the words like small stones thrown against the window, each one meant to crack resolve. She wanted to step forward, but she kept still, her hands folded tightly over the chart. Just then, the door burst open and a voice carried in, "Daddy!" Lily rushed across the threshold, hair tumbling from her braid, her school sweater slightly too big for her small frame. She flew past Edward without a glance and launched herself onto the bed, wrapping her arms around Richard's chest. Richard's breath caught, but not from weakness. His arms, hesitant at first, folded around his daughter and drew her close. "Lily," he whispered, pressing his face into her hair. "My girl." "I missed you," she said, words muffled against his gown. "Every night I prayed you'd wake up." The room softened with her presence. Where Edward's voice had spread cold calculation, Lily brought warmth like a lamp switched on in a dim room. Emily felt her throat tighten. She wrote down nothing, only absorbed the sight, the contrast so stark it needed no annotation. Edward cleared his throat, impatient. "It's late for children." His gaze flicked at Emily as if she were responsible for the intrusion. "He's fine," Richard said, his tone firmer. He stroked Lily's hair, steadying himself with her nearness. "More fine than some." His eyes returned to Edward. "I won't be signing anything. The company is not yours to carve." For a moment, silence burned hotter than speech. Edward's jaw clenched, and the veneer of charm cracked. He straightened, tugging his cufflink as if to anchor himself back into control. "Very well," he said at last. His tone carried the chill of winter air seeping under a door. He turned toward the exit, pausing long enough to cast a final look at his brother. "But remember this, Richard. Without my guidance, all you'll have left is that nurse with her charity smiles. We'll see how far she gets you." The words Then Edward was gone. His footsteps clipped and final down the hall. Richard's hand tightened protectively on Lily's shoulder. Emily, still by the window, felt the sting of the remark but held her head high. She met Richard's eyes briefly, then looked away, busying herself with the chart. Her pulse thudded louder than the heart monitor. The door clicked shut behind Edward, but the echo of his cruelty remained, a shadow falling across the fragile calm they had built. The garden glowed beneath the fading sun, a hush of orange and violet lying across the benches and clipped hedges. Richard walked slowly between the stone paths, each step measured, his hand resting lightly on Emily's arm. The rhythm of his steps was fragile but stubborn, like a man learning not just to walk again, but to reclaim a place in the world. "My brother," he said after a pause, his breath shallow but steady. "He sees nothing but numbers on a balance sheet. To him, I am worth more silent than alive." Airbus looked away, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "I'm not like him," she said softly, "but I'm also not like you. I'm just a nurse with debts, someone who doesn't belong in that world of glass towers and boardrooms. I'm afraid if I step closer, I'll be swallowed whole." They stopped by a rose bush, its late blooms trembling in the evening air. Richard turned to her, his gaze clear, sharpened by survival. "Emily, don't ever think you are just anything. When the darkness had me, it wasn't power or wealth that kept me tethered. It was your voice. You gave me a reason to keep breathing." Her throat tightened, lifted her hand from his, stepping back quickly as if distance might shield her heart. "You should keep walking," she whispered, turning before he could see the tear she pressed away with her sleeve. Richard watched her retreating figure, his chest heavy, then lifted his eyes toward the sky, the colors deepening into dusk. Somewhere between faith and fear, the truth waited, patient as the coming night. Nier Tout pooled in the corners of room 312, the monitors dimmed to a sleepy glow. Richard lay awake, the ceiling a pale raft above him, until a rush of broken pictures rose like a tide. Rain on glass, a conference room washed in blue light, Edward's profile tilted toward a lawyer's briefcase. Words blurred. Interim control, signatures, timing, and then slipped away. The only steady sound was the echo of a voice that had once held him to the shore. Emily's, calm, ordinary, saving. He stirred and pressed the call button. Emily came quietly, smoothing the blanket the way she always did. Before she could speak, the door nudged open again, and Lily peeked in, pajama sleeves bunched at her wrists. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered, tiptoeing to the bed. "Uncle Edward said you don't need to pay for my school anymore. He said, it's taken care of." She frowned, unsure why that felt wrong. Emily's glance flicked to Richard. She didn't fill the silence with comfort this time. The scattered images in his mind snapped closer, the lawyer's briefcase opening like a mouth. "He's arranging a world without me," Richard said, voice rough. "He wants me gone from the company." Lily's small hand found his. Emily stood on the other side, steady as a handrail. Richard tightened his grip on Emily's fingers, a decision hardening in his chest. "If I don't speak," he murmured, "everything will belong to him." The chandelier threw a warm amber hush over the Hale boardroom. Long table, high-backed chairs, portraits watching from dark frames. Edward stood at the head like a man taking measurements. "For stability," he told the family and the attorney, "we'll need to reallocate certain assets and clarify interim control." The lawyer opened his leather folio, pages whispered like dry leaves. The double doors eased wider. Richard stepped through slower than he once would have, cane tapping lightly on the parquet. Emily paused, just inside the threshold, unobtrusive near the paneling. Lily slid into a chair at the end, eyes bright and anxious. Conversation stalled, then fell. Edward's smile thinned. "This is unexpected." "Not to me," Richard said, crossing the last stretch of floor. He set the cane tip square and looked down the table, meeting each gaze before settling on his brother. "Your agenda can wait." Flooring recovered his poise. "We're only safeguarding what you built, Richard. Markets hate a vacuum." Richard's voice was steady. "There is no vacuum. He held Edward's eyes. "I'm not dead, and I know you wish I were." Silence drew tight as wire. The lawyer glanced at his notes and then at the floor. Edward's fingers closed around a crystal tumbler until the cut glass kissed his knuckles. The faint chime of ice against rim was the only sound, and his eyes sparked with a hard, private anger. Morning light filtered into the estate's grants the polished wood. The family lawyer rose, spectacles low on his nose, and unfolded a thick folder. "As instructed, I've reviewed the previous documents. There are provisions here, drafted by Edward Hale, that positioned him as interim controller should Richard remain incapacitated indefinitely." His words hung in the air like a gavel already struck. Edward stiffened. "That was contingency. Nothing more. I acted in the company's best interest." Foreground, seated upright at the far end, tapped the cane once for silence. Best interest or self-interest? The difference is finally clear. He nodded to the lawyer, who opened a second folder. "From today forward, significant portions of my holdings will be transferred into a foundation. Scholarships for nurses who shoulder burdens with little thanks. The first award will bear Emily Carter's name." Crucial, a ripple of shock across polished veneers. Edward slammed a hand on the table. "This is madness. You've been manipulated, Richard."
"That nurse has bewitched you!"
Richard's voice cut, measured but resolute.
"The only person who gave me reason to wake, to fight, was not you, Edward. It was Emily."
Silence answered, thick and undeniable. And then, faintly from the corridor beyond, came the distant shutter click of a camera. By afternoon, the news would leak. The Hale family feud was no longer private. It was on its way to becoming public record. Lineback hospital corridors buzzed differently now. Nurses leaned in close at the water fountain, their voices dropping the moment Emily passed. In the break room, whispers prickled like static. She knew what she was doing, getting close to a millionaire in a coma. Not everyone gets their tuition paid by a patient. Some laughed softly, others only raised brows. The words followed her like a draft under every door. Emily stacked charts neatly, hands trembling despite herself. For months, she had spoken to Richard when no one else would, not for reward, but because silence had felt too cruel. Now those small mercies were twisted into ambition. She lingered by the supply closet longer than needed, trying to hide the flush of shame. At noon, Dr. Harris found her sitting alone, coffee cooling untouched. "Gossip burns hot," he said gently, taking the seat across. "But fire dies when truth stands long enough. Give it time." His voice was steady, like stone underfoot. She tried to smile, but failed. That evening, in the empty break room, the weight finally broke her composure. She pressed her face into her hands, tears slipping free. Had she stepped too far? Had kindness blurred into something selfish? The muffled sobs faded into silence. Then a sudden noise outside drew her up, a clatter of cameras. The press gathered at the hospital gates, their lenses pointed toward the entrance. Tomorrow, she realized, the storm would not stay within these walls. It was waiting outside, ready to swallow her whole. Emily's apartment was a cramped second-floor walk-up above a laundromat, the kind of place where the walls held the smell of detergent and fried food from the diner next door. She slipped inside after her shift, dropped her bag on the sagging couch, and stared at the stack of bills on the counter. For the first time since her mother's death, the thought of leaving nursing entirely pressed heavily on her chest. Maybe they're right, she thought. Maybe I don't belong in his world at all. A knock startled her. When she opened the door, Lily stood there, clutching a school bag too large for her shoulders. "Daddy wanted me to tell you," the girl said shyly. "He's grateful. He doesn't want you to disappear." Emily knelt, hugging the child tightly, the words sinking deeper than she expected. Moments later,
Footsteps echoed on the stairwell.
Richard appeared, leaning slightly on his cane, his tailored coat out of place in the narrow hallway. His gaze swept over the peeling paint, the dim light, the single worn chair by the window. He said nothing at first, just absorbed the stark contrast to his own estate. Finally, he spoke quietly, his eyes fixed on her.
Emily, the distance isn't between your world and mine. It's between me and my brother.
The words struck harder than she was prepared for. She froze, heart racing, lips parting but no sound forming. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what she could not yet say. The night was still, the city lights shimmering like scattered jewels beyond the Hale estate. On the rooftop, moonlight washed the stone railings in silver. Richard stood waiting, leaning slightly on his cane, until Emily stepped out of the stairwell, her figure small against the vast sky.
"Nej, I asked you here," he began, voice lower than the wind,
"because there are things I've carried too long in silence." He turned toward her, eyes steady. "When I was trapped in that darkness, I heard you. Every word you whispered, the jokes about cafeteria food, the stories about your mother, the promises you didn't know I could hear. Those kept me alive." Emily's chest tightened. "I only did what any nurse should," she said, though her voice trembled. He shook his head. "No, others came and went, but you stayed. There isn't enough money in this world to repay what you gave me. Hope when I had none." A pause stretched, then he stepped closer, the night air cool between them. "Emily, my gratitude became something more. Somewhere along the way, it turned into love." Her breath caught. Her hooked at him, then away, as if the stars themselves might answer. Finally she whispered, "I need time. Time to believe I could ever deserve this."
She turned, walking toward the stairwell, her shoulders stiff with unspoken feeling.
Richard stood beneath the moon, her absence echoing louder than the city below. Summer sunlight spilled over the Hale gardens, where roses lined the walkways, and white ribbons floated lightly in the breeze. Chairs stood neatly arranged beneath an arch woven with blossoms, simple yet elegant. Reporters gathered discreetly beyond the gates, their cameras already poised. But inside the garden, the air felt hushed, almost reverent. Emily walked slowly down the aisle, her gown modest but radiant, every step a quiet defiance of the whispers that had once surrounded her. At the altar, Richard waited, strong in posture if still leaning lightly on his cane, his eyes following her with unwavering tenderness. Lily stood proudly at his side, a small card clutched in her hands. When the vows paused, Lily stepped forward, her young voice ringing clear.
"Daddy, Emily, you taught me that family is not about money, it's about showing up for each other. I'm happy you found someone who never gave up." Her words trembled, but the applause that followed steadied her. The minister handed them the rings. Richard took Emily's hand, slid the band gently onto her finger, and spoke with conviction. "From this day forward, my legacy is not a company. My legacy is people, the ones I love and the lives we choose to change." The cameras clicked in bursts, but Emily barely noticed. Her vision blurred with tears as she whispered her vows in return. In that moment, beneath the arch of roses, they were not just bride and groom. They were proof that compassion could outlast ambition, and love could rewrite even the coldest of stories. Undermined, the Hale gardens glowed beneath the late-day sun, every leaf gilded with the soft gold of summer's end. Emily walked slowly beside Richard, his cane tapping lightly against the stone path, while Lily skipped between them, her laughter trailing like music in the air. They paused by the fountain where the water caught the sky's fire. Richard rested a hand on the cool stone and looked at Emily. "When I was lost in that darkness," he said, his voice calm but full, "it was your voice that broke through. I held on to every word, though I had no strength to answer." Yes softened, her lips curving into a small, incredulous smile. "I never thought I could change anyone's life," she admitted quietly. Before Richard could respond, Lily slipped her small hands into theirs, one on each side,
Her eyes shone with certainty far older than her years. "But you did," she said firmly. "You didn't just change Daddy, you changed this whole family." For a moment, none of them spoke. The horizon flared with orange and violet, and the garden seemed to exhale a long, gentle breath. Richard squeezed Emily's hand. Emily bent to kiss Lily's hair, and together they looked out at the blazing sky. It was not the end, but a beginning, proof that a single act of kindness could ripple outward, reshaping lives and leaving behind a legacy richer than any fortune. Under the glow of the sunset, their world felt whole at last. In the end, Richard and Emily's story reminds us of something we often forget in the rush of life. Wealth, titles, and power may fade, but kindness leaves a legacy that no amount of money can buy. Emily never set out to change a millionaire's life. She simply chose to act with compassion when no one else would. Yet, that small act became the seed of transformation, not only for Richard, but for an entire family. Selectively, let's ask ourselves, how many lives could we touch if we practice simple kindness every day? Sometimes, the most ordinary words, spoken softly with care, can reach further than we ever imagined.
As one saying goes, true legacy is not measured by what we leave in bank accounts, but by the love and hope we leave in people's hearts. If this story made you reflect, drop a number 1 in the comments. Which state are you watching this from? Share with us below. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to At Kindness Audio so you won't miss the next inspiring tale.